My name is Eric Van Horn. I bought my first franchise in my 20s, and since then, I've owned 6 brands with 25 stores in 8 states. I've also helped 1,000 people find the right franchise for them. People like us who are not cut out for the 9-to-5 and like to work smarter, not harder. How do we find the right franchise, buy it, grow it, sell it, and how do we do it in a way to own the business without it owning us? Those are the questions, and I'm on a mission to give you the answers. Welcome to Franchise Secrets. Welcome to the Franchise Secrets podcast with your host, Eric Van Horn here. And today's guest is Jeremy Bollington, and he is a franchisee and an area representative. So franchisee, franchise partner with Waxing the City and Blo Blow Dry Bar. And Blo Blow Dry Bar is where he's also an area representative. So today I want to dive into a lot of the area representative stuff because we haven't really spent much time on this podcast talking about that kind of thing. And I was an area rep for a couple different brands, and I love that model. It's not seen very much anymore. So Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be on. These interesting times.
Oh, yeah. Very interesting time. So context, we are probably a week into coronavirus, and certain places have been shut down. My yoga studio has been shut down for a week in Denver, I think at least a week. And I have friends that have this. It's still in the beginning phases of this, but I was skiing with somebody a week and a half ago and just found out he got coronavirus. I've self-quarantined myself for I'm just about out of my 2 weeks. But yeah, it's super interesting time. So that's just context for everybody, because we're probably going to listen to this years later, Jeremy, and be like, remember when? And so maybe we can make some predictions here to see who's right and what kind of strategic moves we're thinking about making and if we actually make them. So go into it. How did you get involved in franchising in the beginning?
Long story, I guess. I was a banker for 25 plus years, and actually lived. The last time we were all facing a crisis, I was in New York City running a big team of people, and it's funny now in a very different world, kind of looking back on that and using some of the things that I learned going through that. Spent many years in banking, London, New York, Hong Kong, and then back to New York. And I got laid off in 2015, or restructured out, as the HR people would say. And it kind of, coincided with, it was the second firm I'd been at. It coincided with our youngest going to college. We'd been building a house down in Charleston, South Carolina. And my wife and I ultimately decided, life's too short to kind of just go through the motions and go get a third banking job, build another team. And it just felt like the right time to go do something different. So we moved south and then started on probably a 6-month trek through the franchise world, trying to figure out what might be the right things to do, and ended up focusing on bricks and mortar and, kind of personal care, beauty services for a number of reasons. We didn't want to do food. Actually looked at some fitness stuff, but just felt there were way too many brands. How do you pick the right one? How do you differentiate? And ended up leaning towards that beauty space and found, the 2 businesses that we ended up.
So was Waxing the City the first one?
Somewhat crazily, we opened the 2 businesses with it. The first locations were side by side, so we built out.
You are crazy.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't do that again.
No.
We found a space that was big enough for the 2, and next to a Whole Foods, perfect location, just kind of great demographics.
2 businesses opening back to back. Did you think there was going to be similarities that turned out to not be so similar when you first opened those 2? The
logic of putting them together, still was there, and we definitely saw the benefits of that, and we still do. Mm-hmm. I think somehow naively thinking, we're opening 2, beauty related businesses, the training, the approach, the launch can't be that different. It was, there were clearly some similarities, but also you're learning 2 different systems, different approaches to training. That was kind of interesting. We gave franchisors a lot of feedback on that. The bit we totally underestimated was how everything kind of comes into a time crunch in those 3, 4, 5 weeks, and the build out's finishing. You're hiring a team. You're getting that team trained. Probably a little bit different to fitness in that, at that time, both businesses were not kind of building, pre-opening client bases.
Weren't doing pre-sales.
Yeah, that was one benefit. Although ironically, I think both of those franchises now are kind of looking at that as a way to help you get off to a faster start.
Are any of those two recurring revenue models, or are they all just pay as you go?
They're evolving, I think. I mean, both now have membership programs, and I think both see the benefit of membership versus packages. If I go back 3-4 years ago, we opened both of those in early 2017. At the time, they were very focused on packages, which are great upfront, but kind of lumpy cash flow.
Yes.
And so I think for both, they're looking more and more at how do you increase the percentage of clients that are membership.
So what do you have open right now? What do you have supposed to be open right now? How many of each?
Right now, 0, because we closed both temporarily a week or so ago. We actually have, those are the 2 locations we have. We've sort of looked at other things, but haven't done that.
So you have those 2 locations that you started in 2017, and you still have those, and then you have an area rep for the blow dry bar.
Correct.
Are you bringing in franchisees underneath you and you supporting them?
Yeah, so the structure is with Blo, I bought the rights to North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. So it's probably a bigger lot. Geography than most area developer role. There's a rationale behind that, in that Blo is not a concept that you'll see on every street corner. So there's not going to be 15 in South Carolina, 20 North Carolina. I wish there was, but it's much more specific to the large markets, and so. Yeah. We were, working with the corporate team of Blo on that. It was really kind of an estimate of what do we think can be opened in those 4 states.
Have you sold any franchisees in those markets?
Today we've got we got 5 franchisees signed up, 6th about to sign, hopefully. We got 3 locations open, 3 are scheduled to open in the next 5 months. I mean, there's you talk about interesting times. Somebody negotiating on a lease right now. Not a bad time to be negotiating.
No, if you didn't sign, and I think you were in my franchise group, Franchise Tribe, and where we have franchisees. I know you're in there, but I brought in my real estate attorney to answer a ton of questions around this for franchisees that are like, if you haven't signed a lease right now, then you're in a good negotiating standpoint. Once that contract is executed, I, as a franchisee, signs it, and the landlords are signing it quickly these days. That's it. I mean, you are now party to that contract. So I think anyone out there that, as we go into the rest of 2020 and into the years beyond, I think there are going to be some really interesting plays for the retail business, for like your business. I mean, franchisees that maybe have 1 location open and they're going to be opening up 1 or 2 or 3 more. I think it's some really good times ahead for them. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting on you think about the real estate space. I've got 1 franchisee looking for space in Raleigh, and it's been a very Raleigh Durham as a whole. It's been a very tight market.
Oh yeah.
And you look at how it's felt over the last 2-3 years, and kind of almost boiling up to a point over the last a month or so ago. It was such a landlord's market, and you talk about that doing a 180 in the space of 3 weeks. It's crazy.
It's been unbelievable.
We all know how many, of us are submitting notes to landlords about, I'd like to talk about a rent deferment or.
Oh yeah. That was the last week. It's like, okay, where can I cut expenses? And I don't want to pay my landlord. And so we're working on that now. Have you had any rent deferrals in any of your locations yet?
We're working on it.
Landlords are like, no, I just need if they can squeak out, if they can just go dark for another couple days, then they'll squeak out that rent. But such interesting times. So where's your mindset with stuff? What have you done with your team? Let's just talk about leadership for a little bit. How have you communicated with your team? What have you done as a leader?
Great question at this time. Maybe I'll break it up into my teams in our operating businesses, and then my franchisees that I support.
Yes.
And I think a lot of this, it's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day about, kind of having gone through this in 2008. And at that time, I was put into a bigger role in the bank I was working for, and, immediately asked to cut 30% of headcount and exit a bunch of businesses. That was, talk about like, wartime battlefield promotion. But I learned a ton of stuff from that. And I think one of the things at that time that I'm definitely using now is communication. That kind of honest, you can't always tell everybody everything, but I think being as open and as honest and realistic as you can be, I think is really, really important. And I think that's suddenly, it's kind of interesting, thinking about doing that with a team of probably overpaid bankers. Hopefully some of them are not listening to this in due course, versus doing it with hourly paid, in my case, sort of stylists, estheticians,
Mm-hmm.
Are kind of worried about how they're going to pay the rent next
Well,
week.
not kind of. Stylists and estheticians, those people in the beauty space are, if we want to be like kind of, generalizing stuff, they do very well. A lot of them, they're, like a lot of America is living paycheck to paycheck right now. Mm-hmm. And this is hitting them really, really hard. You can also say, I know in the beauty space in general, I'm not sure about the estheticians and whatnot, but there's a lot of drama in the beauty space, because I was in solo salons, and that's the people that came in were trying to get out of the drama in the salons that they were working in. So there's just that. And then if you're watching the news and you have drama in your life anyway, it's like everything's just escalated. So like I would rather be talking to bankers at that time, having conversations, versus talking to people in the beauty industry. So you have to be very how do you do that? How are you navigating that?
There was a lot of drama in the banking.
Maybe it's just people, huh?
Yeah, I don't know. So how are we doing? I mean, so, a very basic and obvious thing. I mean, most of my teams are probably in the 20 to 25-year-old, 30-year-old range. Mm-hmm. Most have probably never had to figure out how to file unemployment benefits. I mean, we've furloughed the whole team. We want them all back, but there's no way we can pay them at the moment.
Yeah.
One of the things I've spent probably way too much time the last 2-3 days, but it's important, and hopefully it sort of sends a message to them that we're trying to do everything we can. Is figuring out how to navigate the South Carolina benefits system. It's a pain in the ass. It's really hard to do. They're all struggling with it. We're trying to help them on that stuff. For me, with the teams we have, and my wife's very involved with that as well. It's like, how do we stay engaged? If this is 2-3 months, how do you stay engaged with them? Can we do some? We're running some training stuff on the 1st of April for one of the teams. Mm-hmm. Can we do that remotely? Obviously, to be safe, but trying to think through all that stuff. How do you keep that team engaged because you want them back? That's sort of, I guess, down at the level of the operating businesses. With my franchisees, it's just constant sort of communication, and again, trying to be open, honest, trying to share. I've invited them all to the things like the franchise tribe. I mean, I think we're all kind of making this up as we go along. There isn't really a playbook for a situation like this, but I think that communicating, trying to get them to think about, let's work on goals for when you get back open. What are the 3 or 4 things you really want to get done in your business, as opposed to just merely panicking and worrying about the here and now.
It's human nature to panic and worry and all of that. And what do you see coming in the future? I'm looking at there's going to be some opportunities from a retail standpoint, also from just a talent. People aren't going to get hired back at some of the companies that they might be working for now. Unemployment's probably going to be higher, but I see a lot of opportunity in there to hire really good people that, but to this point, I haven't been able to get. So what do you, as you look forward from an opportunity standpoint, what are you seeing?
I'd say 2 or 3 things. I think one, kind of the real estate environment. So I think anybody that's looking at new locations, I think that's going to be more of a buyer's market, hopefully. Can't be any less. So
exactly.
That should be, I think that'll be a positive. And hopefully flowing out of that as well, things like construction costs. I think we've all seen those climbing. I wouldn't even say steadily. I mean, it just, those have ratcheted up. So I think that piece should be good. I think I agree with you on the, the workforce, the hiring piece. I think that, should give some opportunities. And I think lastly, I think we all know, as we look at sort of franchise systems we're involved in, there are people within there as franchisees that probably shouldn't have been in there, or if they got in, wasn't as easy as they thought. Because let's face it, this stuff's not easy. I think this might be sort of the final tipping point for them. So I think there'll be resale opportunities
Oh,
that
so do
take
I.
me out of the pain.
I do too. And it's not easy. That's what's been frustrating to me. Everyone thinks getting into business is easy because it has been easy. If you get into the right franchise that's really strong and you happen to get into it and you're kind of like an average operator, people have done really well in the past. Everything's completely changed. You can't just skate along anymore. And I think some of these franchise systems that have been just incredible systems from the franchisor, like the franchisor is really good, but they've brought in average to below average franchisees who've survived. And some of those have even thrived because the franchisor is so strong, which is very unique. Most franchisors aren't as strong as some of these, but now all of a sudden they're going to open back up with 50 to 70% of their past customers that they had last month. And now they kind of have to start over. And in many ways, and a lot of them just aren't cut out for that because it's like the whole environment's changed. So I think there's going to be average franchisees that are part of above average franchisors that are going to want to get out of business. And I'm excited about helping them, transition out. And it really is helping them transition out because they don't want to do it anymore. And they've done really well up to this point. And then you've got this other group of franchisees that are, even good performers in not as strong or robust systems. But now those franchisees are going to probably transition out where franchisees that are really good entrepreneurial business owners are going to have a lot of opportunity to acquire. So I think there's going to be a market of existing franchisees. And I've been working on that earlier this year anyway, because I think that's a really good way to grow. And because I've done it personally, I've grown by buying out existing franchisees, but that whole market is going to explode. And one of the things I want to do and get your opinion on it is I want to have a place where franchisees can sell their franchises to other franchisees. And I'm getting ready to put together something for that because I don't see it out there. There's the biz by sales and the different things, but there's no marketplace for that. What do you think?
Another Facebook group.
Yeah, exactly.
Cut out the brokers. I mean, in terms of the business brokers, because I think if you think about, I know somebody was asking, or maybe it was you asking the other day, where do you find resales?
Yep, that was me.
Good question. I think most of us would probably, if you were, let's say I was looking for something in Charleston, I'd probably go tap into one or two of the business brokers.
Yep.
But there's probably a way to sort of remove them out of the equation.
Well, and that's it. I mean, everybody wants to make their money, and I get it. I mean, we all make our money different ways, and I get that. But there's not a really good way, except if you're an insider of a particular franchise, and that's typically the way it's been done. You're on the inside of Blow Dry Bar, and you know that so and so is getting ready to sell, and you already have somebody else that can probably take them over or buy them out, and that's the way that it's been done. And the reason there's not anything out there online is because somebody wants to be the middleman to get some money in between it. And I don't need to make money at that. I want to provide that. So it's deal flow. It's deal flow for me, for my friends, for you, and different people. So it's in the works, man. It's in the works.
All right.
Have you bought out existing franchisees, or have you seen many trade, or is this going to be new ground for you as well?
I mean, it would be new ground for me for sure. There've been, just trying to think. I mean, there've been a number of resales in the blow dry system. I think it's one of those businesses where you have to work at it. It's definitely not I hang the shingle up and hire an initial team and off it rolls. I mean, you're always hiring. I think when I look at people that have sold out, I think they came into it thinking that it was semi-absentee.
Yeah, everybody, that's been the big buzzword, is semi-absentee. And I'm one of the guys that I buy semi-absentee businesses or try to buy semi-absentee businesses.
But I think it's wholly different though if you're buying it where you've already you've got multiple businesses, you've got somebody as a trusted manager or somebody on your team that you can put into it. What I've seen is that the person comes out of corporate and thinks that they can write the check to build it out, hire somebody, and it'll go flying along, and that's doesn't always work out.
No, because they talk to somebody like me and they say, is this a semi-absentee business? And if they say, is this a semi-absentee business? And I'm validating, which I don't do because I've got but if they talk to somebody like me that's been a franchisee, that's owned businesses, that has done them semi-absentee, and someone from corporate America calls me up and validates, like says, hey, is this a semi-absentee business? Which is not the way to ask the question. But if they do that, I'll say, Yeah, I live in South Dakota. I have it in Denver. I have it here. And they're like, okay, that's semi-absentee business. Well, no, it's not, because like what you just said, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And that's why, like on social media, because as I help people buy franchises, I rarely put out there what I own, because I don't want people to think like, because Eric owns it, it must be semi-absentee and it'll be easy for me to do, because that's kind of the opposite of what's really true. I've done it. And so there's just been so much push out there of franchisors selling their system as semi-absentee without even having proven semi-absentee operators out there. So it's something that's super frustrating to me. And if you've listened to this podcast at all out there, you'll understand that. And that's why I have like the Facebook group for franchise buyers. They're not really ready to buy, but they're in that research phase. And I talk about this type of stuff in that group so they can really get a really clear understanding of what it's really like, what a semi-absentee business is really like. And I think at the end of the day, it's semi-absentee to a specific owner with specific experience. It's not a blanket semi-absentee. Did you, like when you got into your stuff, did you think it was semi-absentee? And no, you were.
No. I mean, I met with, I probably, the banker in me said, like, go do as much due diligence as you can. I talked to every other concept in the, the sub-segment, even though I'd sort of pretty much decided which way I was going to go. But I figured, you're going to learn from those competitors. Met a bunch of owners. Yeah. And I think we went in eyes wide open. Probably underestimated still how much turnover.
Always underestimate stuff, I think, and I think it's just, every time I go into a business, I know I'm going to underestimate how much it costs to get open, how much work it really is, underestimate the flu virus that might become a pandemic. But, I think that's just kind of our nature. Hey, it's Eric here. I hear from a lot of people that they're looking to buy their first brand or maybe their second or third brand, and they're not sure where to start, or they're not sure if they're looking in the right places. Well, that's where I come in. I help people find really good brands. And if you're thinking about your second or third, or maybe your first brand, let's set up a time to talk. You can go to talkwitheric.com. That's ERIK, talkwitheric.com. Now back to the show. So the 800-pound gorilla in the waxing space is European Wax. Mm-hmm. And I know a number of their franchisees, and they have a regional development model, area rep model as well. And I know people are very, very happy with them from at least a number of years ago. And so you are second to market in that brand. And there's been other brands that go second to market, and sometimes they do better going second to market. Like, just give us some insight, like, in that brand, knowing that European Wax is the big one. And for just some context, I was in Liberty Tax, and H&R Block and Jackson Hewitt were bigger than us. And I was okay with that. I don't always have to be first to market in a brand. So anyway, what do you think about that?
No, it's a great question. I think when we were looking at that subsegment, part of what I was trying to find was something that was, a proven subsegment. Ignore the concepts on that at that stage. Trying to find that. Also looking for something that wasn't pure startup. So what I ended up, and ironically, with both businesses, the size of the system when we signed on was similar, around about 40, 45, 50 locations. Mm-hmm. So it sort of felt like they'd gotten over that hump of, can they actually be a franchisor? They probably had, somewhere in the I think I was the location, or my first one was location number 137, even though, we were probably the 60th or 70th open. So they were selling, a reasonable number of territories. That 800-pound gorilla kind of question, I sort of looked at it less in that context. In the market we were looking at, European Wax had 2 locations at the time. They've got 3 now. So it didn't feel like it was totally saturated. Really what there was then was just a lot of, either local or regional competition. And you sort of, we looked and said, do we think we can do better than that? Do we have a different story? Do we have a differentiated offering? Which we felt we did. The franchise, for Waxing the City, it's a slightly longer service time. It's definitely more about the customer experience as opposed to rapid turn that I think European Wax does. So there's some downsides to the Waxing the City approach in terms of from a revenue per hour perspective. But our view was, you've got to have a different proposition if you're going to go into a market where there are both established local competitors and the 800-pound gorilla. And we felt that was the case, and that client feedback has been good on that regard. It's interesting because part of why we looked at personal care space was I knew some people that had done Massage Envy up in New Jersey where we used to live. As I looked briefly at massage, it felt like that was sort of a situation where you'd got that 800-pound gorilla, but you also had 3 or 4 kind of wannabes that were already in a large size, sort of Elements, Massage Heights, things like that.
Yep.
To me, that felt like that was way too crowded. Whereas on the waxing side of the time, there was Waxing the City, Lunchbox, Unikay, I think, were the 3 kind of wannabe number 2s.
Yep.
And I think Waxing the City has kind of grown into that position. Partly I think because it's part of a bigger organization.
Yeah, that's where I was just going to go too, because was it always part of that bigger organization when you got involved, or was it acquired?
Well, it was acquired like 3-4 years before we got involved.
Before you got involved. So you got into it. It was part, and was it the same group that owns Anytime Fitness?
Yeah.
So they had franchising experience. I mean,
exactly.
It's not, I think that's a very big deal, especially if I'm going second to market, to be a part of a brand that has, Anytime Fitness that's been fantastic. From what I understand, I've been tried to buy out some. Speaking of buying out existing ones, like I've been trying for years to get into that system, and these owners just like, no, not ready to sell yet. I'm like, oh shoot, because they do really well in these smaller outlying markets. Does that same private equity company or that holding group that owns Anytime Fitness still own Waxing the City? And what else do they own?
Yeah, Waxing the City is a sub of, it's now called Self-Esteem Brands,
Mm-hmm.
which then has Anytime Fitness, Waxing the City. They bought Bar Method recently, the sort of Pure Bar-like brand, and I think that they're looking for other things. And it was interesting because I think on the opposite side, my other business was, talk about comparing 2 systems. So Blo, based out of Toronto, that's their only business. The owners, effectively the founders, they bought the original concept in 2000, I think it was 2009, 2010 from the original person started in Vancouver. The Blo team, as is today, had a background in franchising kids' hair salons in Canada. So they had a franchising knowledge base in sort of the salon world. And they bought the Blo concept and took it from 3 to now we're over 100 locations. It's interesting to compare and contrast. You've got a much smaller team, but pretty effective team.
Think about somebody out there. They're looking at a company that is private equity owned, and they're looking at a company that is more mom and pop-ish, like bootstrapped in some ways. And I talk about this quite a bit to people, but like from your perspective, like compare and contrast those 2 systems because they both got advantages and disadvantages.
Yep.
And Rourke is like one of the big ones out there. So you don't have to worry about them running out of money right now in this environment. What would you tell somebody that's saying, what's the major difference between being a part of a budgety type mom and pop startup versus a massive private equity company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, I think if I think about, if I look over the 4 years that I've been involved with both, I've probably seen more change transition on the Waxing the City side. And I think some of that is, just the nature of if you're part of a bigger corporation, the leadership there of Chuck Runyon and Dave Mortensen at the Anytime Self-Esteem level has been consistent throughout, but there have been changes in terms of, brand president, brand head. There are functional teams that support, whether it's marketing, ops, and just by nature of a corporate business, you see changes there. Some good, some not so good. On the blow dry side, it's actually been a pretty consistent team. It's definitely, more of that, sort of smaller, kind of corporate headquarter feel to it. But I think there's probably been a lot more consistency there. I think resource-wise to attack different projects, I think, the larger organization obviously has the benefit of that to some extent.
Sure.
So that's positive. The downside of that is sometimes, the corporation may be pursuing things that may not be totally relevant to that individual brand. And some of that gets sort of lost there as opposed to, business where everybody's totally focused on the one brand.
If you had to describe, like, and this is probably a pretty generic way to do it, like a corporate feel versus family feel, like if you had to kind of put some descriptive words in there between the two, what words would you choose?
I was at the Blo franchisee conference a few weeks back before all this, this broke out. I would say that business feels more like a family. The franchisee group, the vendors, the staff that people bring to the conference that have perhaps been there for 2-3 years. I don't see as much of that with the bigger organization. And I think it's sort of interesting because I think one of the things that Waxing the City are trying to do now is create their own franchise conference, that type of thing. They used to piggyback on the back of what Anytime we're doing. And so I think they're trying to create more of that.
What about being around some of the other franchisees? Because franchisees at Anytime, I mean, they've been business owners for a while. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they seem like they're pretty semi-absentee.
Yeah, I think so.
Have you learned anything from some of those old timers?
Probably not a huge amount of crossover. I mean, there are 2 or 3 owners, one of whom I know pretty well, who's got both, and so a really good operator. But I would say most of, if not much all of the Waxing the City franchisees are not Anytime owners. They've come into it because they were looking for something in the beauty space or that type of business, as opposed to saying, hey, we love the franchisor.
Yeah.
Whatever they touch must be great. And so there hasn't been that much of that.
Is the grass always greener? Do people think, I wish I had private equity, or gosh, I wish they were a little bit more family? Do you get that from both sides?
No, I don't think so. There are a couple of us that have both, actually, that are in both Waxing the City and Blo. So I think we always, compare and contrast, and that view can change depending on on circumstances. I think what we're all going through now, I mean, I think people with multiple brands, I think you're all going to look back and go, how do you feel about the franchisor?
Yeah. How
did they react to this? How did they treat the franchisees? How constructive were they? I'm not going to comment on where we're at in that, but I think we'll all back in 3-4 months' time, and maybe our views of individual franchisors might have changed a bit in that.
There's some franchisees that are probably not happy with their franchisors a couple months ago, and now franchisors are either stepping up to the plate so they can kind of rise to the occasion, and the words that people keep saying is just over communicate, and so some of those franchisors are really becoming more franchisee focused versus sales focused right now. Have you seen some of that within your own organizations? Just like some of them, just like, you don't even have to tell me what brand, but just the type of communication that you're getting that you think represents a really good franchisor at this time.
Yeah, I think I've seen one in particular really step up. And I think it's back to what we talked about leadership. How are they communicating? What are they doing? What are they facilitating? How are they pulling all those ideas from franchisees out to be shared with the broader franchise group? I think in both cases we've got Facebook groups that that are a good forum. How's the franchisor helping in that? How are they spurring idea generation? And definitely seeing different approaches.
How are you kind of pivoting right now? Because we're going into this, like, you're real high touch in your businesses. How are you guys pivoting right now, or is it just closing and waiting? Is there any type of thing that you're doing to try to keep customers engaged?
Yeah, I wish we could do remote waxing, but that's one of my friends yesterday was actually, because we'd sent out notices to all customers saying we're temporarily closed, and he's like, what? No drive-through? We're all thinking about how do you can you do gift cards? Can you pre-sell like, I don't know, reopening packages or things like that? But there's also sensitivity, and we've talked about this with one of the franchisors today. There's that element of, I think a lot of people are kind of shocked, in shock at how you market and engage with your customers right now. I think you've got to be really, really careful and sensitive around that. There will become a time, hopefully there's sort of a, almost like a launch pad to be reopening in, 2 weeks' time or whatever. I mean, however long that is. And I'm sort of hoping that there are ways to sort of engage there. But in these two businesses, I mean, you have to have people in the store. It's kind of, what we're doing is some of the girls are creating, some of the stylists are creating how-to videos on certain style, put that stuff out on social, try to stay engaged. But to go doesn't really work.
Why didn't we all just buy like these remote franchises a couple years ago where we'd be like, some of these franchises, I was talking to some of them and they're thriving right now. There's very few businesses that are actually thriving right now, but I do know of some. They're ones that I'm looking at myself. I'm like, this is super interesting to see why they're thriving. Will they continue to thrive? Will they thrive through a recession? And there's some out there that will actually do that, but they're not the fun, exciting, sexy businesses that that a lot of people want to own. I've all of a sudden gotten jealous of some of my friends out there in these dirty businesses that like are hiring right now.
Yeah.
But that's the way it is. That's business. What do you think people should know right now as we're in this environment? Like what kind of last piece of advice or things would you want to give the audience of franchisees and franchisors that are listening?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think it comes back to what we talked about earlier, leadership and community. And to me, the most important part of that is communication and, thinking about things optimistically. I mean, it's we can all get wrapped up in, oh my God, if I look at my brokerage account, I look at my bank account, we'll get through this. I wish I could predict how we'll get through it and timing and that, but we'll come out of the other side. And so I think communicating with your constituencies, whether that's franchisor, whether that's employees, community. I mean, those have been the three big ones for most of us, I guess. And then thinking about using this time to kind of like do stuff that you never get around to, whether it's personally or whether it's just from a business perspective. You've been thinking about changing some operational stuff. Like, well, go get it done. You can probably do that now.
I know. And I know people that they think like that, they talk like that, but they don't actually do it because they're caught up in all, they're watching the news. Yeah, they're doing all of this other stuff. And I mean, now is the time to do that stuff. I'm doing it right now. I'm excited. My kids are at home and I'm like, wow, I don't have to worry about taking them to school. And my morning routine's very different than what it was before. And like, I'm loving this. And I'm getting stuff done that I wasn't able to get done before, especially from a content perspective. I mean, you're in that Facebook group with me, Franchise Tribe, franchisetribe.com. I'm able to bring in people that have the time to come in there now and to help all of us out. And there's going to be relationships formed. People in there are going to have relationship with each other. I'm bringing in experts in there and people in the group are going to develop friendships with some of these experts. So there's a unique, like people that don't take advantage of this downtime in their own business and personally, it's like they're missing out on something big. I heard something the other day is like, the freshman 15, everybody eats bad their freshman year. They're like it's going to be the Corona 15 because people are like, they have this opportunity to better themselves right now. And there's going to be a segment of the population that actually goes into a dark place and it doesn't do that. So it's up to us, right? I mean, that's why we're entrepreneurs. So how do you keep positive and forward focused through this time where the news cycle is anything but?
Yep. I think trying to limit how much of that you're taking in. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's like one piece a day just to check in where it's at. And also just trying to find, what's real, what's fact, what's actually true. So that's one. But then I think for me, the other thing is just going back to, 2008. That was just the craziest time being in New York at that time. You never quite knew what was, and it wasn't, like this where it was like straight away. I mean, it built up really from, early 2008 all the way through, middle of 2009. And I think living through that, I just, I reflect on what I learned from that and try to put it in practice. And, it's that we'll get out of it and let's look for opportunity. Let's have a positive mindset.
Yeah, I like that. Have you read the McKinsey and Company COVID-19 implications for business, that article that they put out?
No, is that going to depress me?
No. I mean, it's a really good article, and it's got some things that contingency planning and how you like look at your different scenarios and stuff. I'll post that into the group. I think now is such a time to be planning for some of this stuff, and you can actually get your staff to do some of this. And if you haven't focused on KPIs, you haven't taken the time to implement that stuff. If you haven't taken the time to develop SOPs, I mean, this is the time for your staff to be able to do a lot of that stuff that you just don't get done when you're too busy. So, well, nice to finally see you face to face and have a conversation with you. Maybe we'll meet face to face, like really one of these days, and get instead of just giving each other like a virtual fist bumper. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, can't do high fives anymore.
No. Oh my goodness, times have definitely changed. I think they're going to be changing for a while. Man, I appreciate you. I appreciate the things that you do inside that Facebook group and helping out the franchise community. Looking forward to getting this thing live. So thanks again.
Well, thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.